The US Appeals Court has ruled that most of President Trump's tariffs are illegal. The judges said while the president had considerable powers to respond to national emergencies, these didn't explicitly include the power to impose tariffs or taxes. President Trump used a power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act when he implemented his reciprocal tariffs, which have been a cornerstone of his foreign policy. The court said the duties can remain in place until the middle of October to allow for the case to be heard by the Supreme Court. The decision doesn't affect tariffs issued under other legal authorities, such as those on steel or aluminium. Mr. Trump has called the ruling incorrect. He posted on his Truth Social platform earlier saying all tariffs are still in effect, calling the court highly partisan, and said that incorrectly said the tariffs should be removed. But he said they know the United States of America will win in the end. Mr. Trump went on to say if these tariffs ever went away, it would be a total disaster for the country. Now, he says with the help of the Supreme Court, we will use them to the benefit of our nation and make America rich, strong and powerful again. Our North America correspondent, Anthony Zerker, has been following the developments. I spoke to him a little earlier. Mr. Trump says he has the right, the power, the responsibility under national emergencies to use tariffs to protect America. What did the court have to say about that?
Well, the court disagreed, and honestly, it's the second court now to disagree. The lower court, beneath the appellate court, also held that this was an impermissible overreach on the part of the president, that he was reading too much into this emergency law that dates back to the 1970s, and that it didn't give the president authorization to basically impose tariffs on whatever country he wants, whenever he wants, and whatever extent he wants. They said that the Supreme Court precedent that they were looking at suggests that for a president to have this kind of broad power really has to be grounded in a law, and Congress has to explicitly say that the president has this sort of authority, not just the president interpreting it in what they said was a very strained manner.
These national emergencies that Mr. Trump said gave him the authority to do that, what was he referring to?
Well, that's the text of the law gives the president in national emergencies authority to impose economic sanctions on other countries. Past presidents have used it to do that. For instance, on Iran after the hostage crisis, Jimmy Carter used it to impose sanctions on that nation. Other countries have used it to impose various sorts of restrictions and penalties. But no president has read a law as broadly as Donald Trump has. But he's saying that the emergency power that is contained within this law gives him this kind of authority.
The Supreme Court then for this, Anthony, next?
It looks like it. Obviously, the court could decide not to take up this case, but I don't think there's anyone who believes that they won't look at this. You have to remember the court is going to move as fast or as slow as it wants, but it goes back into formal session at the beginning of October, and this is certainly going to be one of the first cases on this list to look at on whether to agree to hear it. And then, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court has in the past had a skeptical view of presidential expansions of power based on what they view as flimsy legislative grounds. They struck down a couple of Joe Biden's big policy initiatives, including restricting greenhouse gas from power plants and forgiving student loan debt for millions of Americans, saying exactly what the lower court said about Trump's tariffs, which is that there was no grounding in law, that the president had been over-interpreting the power granted him in these laws that Biden cited at the time.
It is a largely conservative Supreme Court at the moment. Will that be giving Mr. Trump some confidence that he'll win out here?
I think Donald Trump certainly views it that way. There are 6 conservative Supreme Court justices out of the 9. 3 of them actually were appointed by Donald Trump in his first term. And if you look at this appellate court ruling, there were only 3 Republican-appointed justices on that 11 judge court. So maybe the White House looks at that and sees now they're going to get to friendlier territory, and they might have a more sympathetic audience from these conservative justices. Although I mentioned before that it's conservative principles, it's conservative justices who had already said that presidents can't strain interpretation of law in order to create new policies, broad new policies. So that'll be an interesting test for this court.
Finally, Anthony, and I don't to put you on the spot here, and I don't want you to speculate too wildly, but several deals have been struck with many international partners based on these tariffs. Does this completely kibosh all of those agreements?
It very well could, and it depends on how the Supreme Court ultimately interprets this. But there's going to be a lot of pressure on this court not to rule against Donald Trump, and you're already hearing it from people like the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that it would be incredibly disruptive if now, after all these months with tariffs and all the revenue that are being brought in, to reverse it, strike it down, and maybe even make the federal government give this money back. That would be an enormous burden and incredibly disruptive to the American economy.
Anthony Zerker there.